Plan for the week. We have assignment due tomorrow. And we're going to start reviewing for our Friday exam tomorrow in class as well. So as always, if you'd like me to go over and come prepared with any practice problems on a particular topic, please let me know so that I can prepare those in advance. Otherwise, I will just ask for questions and answer questions. And if we run out of questions, we'll stare at each other awkwardly until there are questions. Any questions before we dive back into interviewing? Okay, well, we were talking about how to prepare at different intervals ahead of the actual interview as that gets closer and closer. So we started with a year or more before, kind of 3 to 12 months before, and now we were at the 1 to 3 month point when we left off. Kind of that you're actively looking for an internship or a job at this point. So what should you be focusing on? We talked about practicing interview questions, finding mock interview groups and working on interviewing each other and practicing speaking about your experience in front of live people. Speaking in front of dead people would be a little strange. And then just analyzing what mistakes do you make? Do you use lots of filler words? Do you struggle to find good examples for particular kinds of questions? Make notes of those, group them into categories, and then look into how to get better at that particular technique. Or if it's something like examples, coming up with examples from your own experience, start brainstorming those kinds of examples. The closer they are to the tip of your tongue in the actual moment, the easier it will be to select an appropriate one. So as we get to the month of, this is where you're either extremely actively looking with the anticipation of having an interview in the reasonably near future, or you have one scheduled and it's out a ways. You should be reviewing and updating your resume. You're likely taking that with you to talk about it. So make sure that it is completely up to date, has everything that you would want as a talking point on it. So make sure you're applying. Make sure you're applying to the relevant jobs that you want. Do apply to a wide range. Just because you apply to a job doesn't mean you have to accept an offer of what is given to you. So if you cast a wide net, you're likely to figure out what your options are. So do some you feel slightly underqualified for. You never know if you could be the perfect fit with just a little bit less experience than they are ideally hoping for, but maybe you're the perfect personality fit and you can jumpstart your career at a level or a position that you might not have applied for otherwise. So you should expect rejection out of those that you feel slightly underqualified for, but there are certainly times where that works out. Apply to some that you feel are perfect fits, where you meet all of those minimum qualifications and have some of those extra qualifications, and also some that you feel like you are overqualified for. This just ensures that if everything else goes south, then at least you have some kind of short-term employment while you are probably still looking for jobs that are closer to the perfect fit or that you're slightly underqualified for and can grow into. Make sure you have something. And it's better to have a job that is related to the career that you want to be working in for the rest of your career, rather than just a job that pays the bills. Because you can throw a job that is related to what you want to do on your resume, even if it's something that you were overqualified for at the time you were working for. Continue crunching interview questions. Actually prepare answers for those that you would anticipate finding. Practice writing code instead of now working on leak code questions and using an IDE. Practice writing code on paper so that when you're in front of a whiteboard, you're not making embarrassing syntax mistakes. They won't be looking for the syntax, but it certainly it puts a better foot forward if you can have solid syntax on the board. As you start to have those interviews, you're likely having phone interviews, Zoom interviews, typical first round interviews. Ahead of the first round interviews, make sure that you're doing the research that we talked about last time. You're researching what the company is, the company's mission, your role within that company. So what department are you working for? What is the hierarchy? Who would your boss be? Who would their boss be? Who would their boss be? Where are you in the company structure? Research the software that they use so that you can talk about it. Even if you don't have experience with it, you can relate it to something that you do have experience with, so that you're not just saying, I don't have any experience with that. I have experience, but with something tangentially related. And I know that it's tangentially related because I know your software. I may not have experience with it, but I know what it is and I know how it relates to my own skill set. So make sure that your answers aren't just representing you, but they're representing you within your role within this new workplace, this company. The intersection of your experience and what they are looking for. Tailor your answers to what you think they are looking for without just seeming like you're pulling experience out of nothing. It should be related experience, but you should be selecting your answers based on what is relevant to this position. Make sure you think about presenting yourself professionally. If it's a phone interview or a Zoom interview, you want to obviously clean up any visible mess. One thing that I find people don't focus on enough, set the screen up and a webcam up so that you're making eye contact with the camera while doing your workflow. So don't place the camera off to the side, or if you have a very large monitor, recognize the difference between where the camera sits at the top of the monitor and where your eyes are going to be. It will look like you are not looking at your audience. And there's something about the human connection there where you're making eye contact that it adds value to your answers. Even though there's no actual difference there, just make sure that you're thinking that through, and that when you are talking to the interviewers, you're not looking at where they are on your screen, you're looking at the camera so that they see you making eye contact with them. Minimize filler words. This is the one that drives me nuts. I try to minimize the number of filler words that I use in my own speech, but it's something that as soon as I ask students to come up and present, I am assaulted with. Ums, us, likes, every other word. This is something that comes across unprofessionally. Like you don't know what you're talking about. That your thought process is empty, or that silence is less awkward than a filler word, I find. If I'm thinking of something, a little bit of silence isn't that bad. But if I'm thinking about something, it comes across and sounds like I don't know what I'm talking about. And the purpose of an interview is to sound like you know what you're talking about. You do know what you're talking about, but you'll do yourself a disservice if you do that. I always have to relay the story of how my parents' TV got its name. My dad stuttered over Netflix and then filled it with a filler word right afterwards. Netflix, and that's the name of their TV now. They don't know how to change it. I'm a truly terrible, terrible son. Make sure you test your setup before you join an interview. Nothing is more awkward than joining an interview and your sound is off, so you can't hear them. Or you're muted and you don't know that you're muted, so you start talking at them. In a tech interview, it is expected that you know how to handle basic tech. And you will know that basic tech. Just make sure that you've checked it before you join the interview. And then just research, again, basic overviews of common data structures and algorithms. Do the last few LeetCode problems. Just make sure that you're practiced. Here you have an interview scheduled. So this is the day before a technical interview. So practice your answers. Make sure that you have the relevant experience on the tip of your tongue, in the front of your mind. But don't practice it to a level that it feels rehearsed. You don't want to feel like you're reading a script when you answer their questions. It should feel genuine. It should feel like you're thinking about it in real time and not that you have a script in front of you. Go back to their website. Make sure that you've reviewed again company personnel, their mission, Who are you going to be talking to in this interview, and make sure you know a few things about them. Final list of experience you'd like to highlight. Already talked about all of this. But then the probably most important thing you can do, prepare a list of questions to ask the interviewer. Having been on this side of interviews, forget if I mentioned this yesterday or not, but there are frequently a specific list of questions that interviewers must ask each candidate, and they cannot ask additional questions. Which means that if you say something very interesting, they would like to follow up on it, they can't ask you that follow-up question. Or if they recognize something from your resume they really like to talk about, they can't just ask you about it. Depends on HR, depends on what they're allowed to do. But if you bring that information forward, or if you ask them a question that deals with it, then they are allowed to talk about it. So it will be your own best friend if you come up with a list of questions that, and we'll talk about how to come up with this list of questions, but there are lots of important points to think about in the questions that you ask them. This is where you show that you are the best candidate, that you have the best preparation and planning, that you know their company well enough to ask good, important questions that are not just how do things work, but ask questions about your fit with the company that both highlight your experience and research capabilities, but also show your fit when they answer that question, and it starts a conversation, a little bit of back and forth. All right, the day of the interview. Make sure you get good sleep. This is something computer scientists are terrible at in general.
I am in agreement on that one. I've had a lot of terrible trouble with sleep. I'm actually very fortunate. I got a decently good amount of sleep last night.
Nothing tells you the importance of getting good sleep like having to be in front of people and speaking about things. If I don't get enough sleep, I babble. It's obvious that I have not gotten enough sleep. I am not happy with how a class period goes. And not enough sleep in this case is 7 hours instead of 8. If it's less than that, I'm worthless. You will be much more productive in general. You'll be making much better use of your time if you take the extra time to make sure that you get the sleep. Make sure that you eat breakfast. As someone who doesn't usually eat in the mornings, I would eat in the mornings ahead of, just to have something in my stomach ahead of an interview. Arrive on time, save room for almost all of the terrible things that could happen to you on the way. If it's less than 1% likely to happen, don't worry about it. Don't save enough time to get in an accident, call your insurance, go get a rental car and make it. That's probably not worth preparing for. But in the 99%, save room for fairly poor traffic. Save room for getting lost. Save room for your GPS leading you to the wrong building. Save room for something that's more than 1% likely to happen.
Parking.
Yeah, finding parking, how far away are you going to be? Things like that. Just make sure that usually that's 30 to 60 extra minutes. If you find yourself sitting in your car for a little bit of time, not the end of the world. You find yourself apologizing for not considering the things that are relatively likely to happen when you're going somewhere for the first time, that looks bad in an interview setting. So be confident, don't be cocky. You know what you're capable of. Don't be ashamed to come across like you know what you're talking about, because you do. But you don't have to be cocky about it. Make sure you talk out loud. Again, show that thought process, show how you think, not just the results of what you think. Interviewers know, and they have lots of experience with stumbling and struggling, but it's about how you handle yourself during that and what your thought process is when you do that. Do you panic? Does that panic get in the way of your ability to think critically? Yes. So that's something to practice in that mock interview setting. If you're doing any kind of coding in a mock interview, be ready to try to justify what it is that you're doing or walk through a thought process that helps to ease a little bit of that, what that stumbling and struggling looks like. Monitor your professors for what happens when they make a mistake on the board. We're doing this on a daily basis. Getting up in front of people, drawing out something on a board, stumbling and struggling through something occasionally. That happens. How do your professors handle it? Some of them are still pretty bad, but after you complete the interview, make sure that you write a thank you email to the recruiter and or any other members of the team who you met with, who might have a hand in a decision. Again, if you don't hear back within a week, check back in. That shows, again, that you are taking the job seriously, that you want the position, that you're not just throwing your resume out to 1,000 different companies and an interview is an interview. If you follow up, it shows that you care about the result of this. You don't get an offer, ask when it would be appropriate to reapply. This just ensures that you don't end up with nowhere left to apply after it's been a couple of months. You've received a few rejections and it feels like you've applied everywhere that has a reasonably open position for something you'd be interested in. The behavioral questions that you might receive. Some common questions that you should be prepared with answers for. Describe a technical or group challenge you've overcome and how you overcame it. This is a question that I would highly recommend for you to use an example out of software engineering for. That is where you are in group projects and where you are learning how to deal with and work with introverts. Even if it's within a classroom setting, just dealing with that experience and using that, it shows that you have some of that experience, but also it is the rawest experience you're going to have with other developers. So there's usually plenty you can pull from for that. A significant technical or group mistake or failure, how did you handle it? This is a tough question because you're going to trade off what is the failure versus how did you handle the failure. Don't be afraid of talking about a true large failure, but make the focus on what you learned from it, how you approach mistakes and failures, that they're bound to happen. It's how you handle the mistake or failure that sets apart a good developer from a bad one. Yeah.
One is a challenge, one is
Yeah. A failure should actually have consequences. A challenge might be something that caused a bit of emotional distress. A mistake or failure is something that affected a deliverable. How I would describe the difference there. Describe a project you worked on that you really enjoyed. Why did you get enjoyment from it? Something you should be ready to answer. And in fact, be ready to pull up. I enjoyed working on this project in my GitHub. And then let them follow up with, oh yeah, can we open that up and take a look at it? Don't offer that usually, but have something ready. Describe a time when you needed to demonstrate leadership. Be ready for and have something prepared for when you took the reins and there was a success on the other end of that, or a failure on the other end of that that you learned a lot from and could process. Describe a time when you were in conflict with another person in a technical setting. How did you resolve the conflict? And a follow-up for just about any of these questions, what would you do differently now to, again, assess how did you learn from and process what happened in these situations? What are your weaknesses? This is a terrible question that everyone hates, but don't describe a weakness that is actually a strength. This is something that, again, people try very hard to do as they're selling themselves. This comes across arrogantly. I work too hard. Okay. Instead, describe a real weakness, how you manage it, or are working to improve it. We all have those weaknesses, but it shows self-reflection. If you can point out a real weakness with yourself, or something that you are actively working on. Shows awareness, critical thinking, the ability to problem solve, and just you know yourself. That comes across so much better and more real than an answer like, I work till 5. Any questions on the behavioral questions you might see in a first or second round? So you can have those experiences from your own personal experience. There are going to be better examples here and there are going to be worse examples. You would rather have one of the better examples that really shows what you're capable of, rather than just something that answers the question, the first thing you could think of. Be prepared for these kinds of questions. All right, let's talk about one of the most important things you can be prepared for, asking questions. Any interview that I've ever been in always has time at the end for, do you have any questions for us? So this is not something that you should be caught off guard by. It's something that you should have an active document ready with the questions that you've prepared in advance. People recognize that you do this. So don't feel bad about saying I'm reading from a list of questions that I have prepared. That is expected. So you would want to ask questions about things like onboarding. What is it like to begin working for this company? What is the day-to-day? Not just in a, what are the day-to-day tasks? You should get that from the job description. But what aspects of the day-to-day are important to you or would demonstrate or allow for you to be able to show that you can do well with that? Let's break down good questions into some categories. First one, genuine questions. You actually want to know the answer to your question. So examples, how does project planning happen on the team? So you ask them workflow related questions. If you're going to be part of project planning or even just deal with the results of the project planning, you're going to be handed specifications from project planning. You could ask how that happens, who's responsible, how is that process handled, when is it handled within the workflow? What brought you, the interviewer, to this company? What has been your experience with the most challenging aspects of working for the company? What advice would you give to someone just starting at this company? Shows that you're invested in this and ask good questions. You're receptive and open to someone else's experience. And it also lets them talk about themselves. People love talking about themselves. I don't care who they are, where they work, how long they've been doing about it, how long they've been doing it. It just makes them feel good. It sets the tone for this person is personable. That is how you come across as personable. Definitely ask questions about the day-to-day. What is it like to work on an average day in this company? Second group, that question.
In interviews I've had, I always feel that when I'm asking about like day-to-day questions that coming across as laziness. Oh, what's the starting time? Like I don't want to come into work.
Oh yeah, no. I would not recommend procedural things like that. Kind of a how is the work day structured? Ask about something that is reasonably technical in there. Like the example of project planning. How does that happen? It's not something that they're going to put on the job requirements or the job description, but it's something that shows genuine curiosity and interest. Whereas when does the day start? Asks things like how late can I sleep in and how that can come across. Like it's a double-edged sword. You're getting information there, but it's probably not the best time to figure that out. Or if you did want to ask something like that, what are the typical hours for a day? How frequently are those adhered to? How frequently is it expected that we stay late or that we... Questions like that are important for planning. Is this job a good fit for me? Has to do with that. And you don't want to work for a company that gets mad at you when you ask that. if they're going to hold that against you, like how dare you not want to work for us, have the privilege for working for us for 90 hours a week every week, even though we can your salary. You don't get overtime.
Oh, they're looking for.
Maybe they are, and you wouldn't want to work for them. Trust me, you'll be miserable. One that's heard online is, what are the expectations of you after 30, 60, or 90 days of being hired? Something like that. That is good. I like that with regards to when will I be expected to have learned and interfaced with the software that the company uses. But that also, when you ask questions like that, it feels like that's something that you're concerned about. Come up with questions that are genuine questions that aren't actually questions that either you're concerned about, unless it is something that comes across. There's a fine line there. That is tough. But yeah, I think you could phrase that question. What are the typical expectations of someone, of a new hire after they've been working for the company for a month? What kinds of projects will I be working on? That sounds eager rather than not. Insightful questions are questions that you ask with the purpose of being able to talk about the company's workflow or the technology that the company uses. So I see, I read, I noticed that you use some technology. How do you handle some problem that uses that technology? That again shows that you're ready to engage with problem solving at the technical level. The reason you're asking this question is so that you can show that you have some experience using that technology, or that you're aware of the problems that can arise from using that technology. But it starts a genuine technical discussion about a workflow that is relevant to the company. That comes across well. You can get something out of that, but they also get something out of you're asking that question. It's not something they would otherwise have asked you. I noticed you designed your solution using some protocol over some other protocol. I know it has some benefits. I also know it has some downsides. What was used to make that decision? How was that decision made? Who was responsible for making that decision? How did that decision come to be? Again, it just shows that you understand the benefits and detriments of that technology, but it's phrased as a question. You're not just demonstrating that you know that material or that information. You're genuinely curious how the company makes its decisions with respect to interesting protocols. Final one, set of passion questions. Just questions that show that you are interested in learning, interested in technology. What opportunities exist at this company for learning about scalability? I'd love to learn more about scalability. I'm not familiar with some technology that you use, but it seems like an interesting solution. Can you tell me more about how it works? It's not expected that you know absolutely everything going into it, but again, you would rather hire someone with genuine passion and curiosity than someone who's just going to do the minimum tasks that they are assigned. The more you ask questions, the more you're seen as an employee with growth potential. Start that process immediately in the interview. It'll help you get hired, and it will help set the first impression as someone who is a future leader. We talked about a lot of the behavioral questions a couple of slides ago. Be specific with those, not arrogant with those. Try not to give details that sound overly impressive. You are you, don't oversell yourself. So don't say something like, I worked on this project and I did all the difficult parts. Instead, just describe the work that you did briefly but technically. Don't make it about me versus other people, or I had to drag other people along in this project. None of that ever comes across well. Just describe what you did. If that is the entirety of the project, I did this, I also did this part, and then I did this part, and I brought it all together. Wait, this was a group project? Let the interviewer prod. What did anyone else do? They helped with this and that. Again, it comes across like you're a team player. You're willing to pick up slack as it happens. You are frustrated about that. You probably don't have a good memory of that experience, but it comes across a lot better just to describe, here is what I did. It wasn't about who did what. It was about, this was the end result. I'm proud of it. Limit unnecessary details in behavioral questions. There's only going to be as much time at the end for questions as you are able to get through the actual interview questions. So if you find yourself blabbing and just giving unnecessary details, it will take away from something that is more important later. Just summarize your contributions. You can also say, I can go into more detail if you'd like, and let the interviewer guide the interview. If they'd like more details out of that because they find it relevant to rank you with the other interviewees, then you should go into more detail there, but let them drive that. And again, focus on you, not who else was working on a project. They are interviewing and trying to hire, considering hiring you, not a team that you worked on in the past. Make sure that you structure your answers. When you prepare answers to these kinds of questions, don't just dive into a story that has an act 1, an act 2, and an act 3. Give them a nugget first. What that means is tell your interviewer what you're going to tell them what your response is going to be about before you dive into all of the details of that response. You can use situation, action, result for that. If they ask you, tell me about something, if you just give them the situation, here's what happened, here's situation was, here's what I did, and here's how it happened. Here's what happened from my contribution. It's very succinct. There's no unnecessary detail in situation, action, result. So the setup, the action, the result of the action. Very straightforward, doesn't waste any time. So what about the most dreaded question in interviews? No one likes this question. It's incredibly open-ended, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a structured answer prepared for a question like this. So you should certainly structure it. What is your current role if you're working in industry? If you're not yet working in industry, what was your college background and experience? But keep that relatively brief. Post-college, reasons why you're exploring the jobs that you are. Keep that to a sentence or two, but just very brief. This is what I'm motivated to do. This is why I was motivated to do it. This is how I can see this company providing that. Outside of work, what relates to your interest in this position? Do not tell them useless hobbies that have nothing to do with the job, but any hobbies that do have to do with skills or experience that could be relevant to the position, make sure that you state those. And then wrap up, why is this position the next logical step for everything that you've mentioned so far? And that is a very good tell me about yourself. Yeah.
Generally, line should be avoided, but how this case is lying a little bit. I think an idea.
I would never do it personally. In what sense?
Like why you're exploring this job. Money is the only reason why I'm here.
Okay.
Other reason.
Yeah. So strive to at least any job that you want to work. Don't apply places unless there's something there. You can focus on or over exaggerate the reasons that you're applying for this, but what skills and experience could it reasonably get you to move on to the next part of your career? Don't phrase it as a way of moving to the next step of my career, but phrase it as this is the skills and experience that I aim to get out of this position because I'm interested in X, Y, and Z. Yeah, you'll definitely be changing up the relative importance of these different aspects. So tell me about yourself. Why is this position the next logical step for you? Money. It's probably what you're thinking. Hobbies that are unique are memorable. you can absolutely mention a hobby that is unique. One that is technical, ones that demonstrate positive personality attributes that showcase that you can be a leader, that you're involved in your community. Those kinds of hobbies are ones that again show you to be a more complete person with diverse interests. Don't say, I enjoy, I don't know, hiking. What does that tell a tech company? How does that? A lot of people like going out into the wilderness, exploring and doing fun things, getting some exercise. None of that is relevant to the position. The technical questions that you will see. Try to solve the problems on your own. As you're preparing, don't try to look up solutions to problems unless you are completely and utterly stuck for a long period of time. Just make sure that you're getting that practice being stuck, practice debugging and making sure that the best foot forward is what you have there and it's not the result of looking something up. Definitely do not use any AI in preparation for a technical interview or especially in a technical interview. We've all seen those stories. Again, solve problems on paper, test your code on paper. How do you know that your solution that is on paper works? So write and run through the equivalent of running a debugger on paper. Make sure that you do this for general cases, base cases, error cases, anything that might show up on an interview. Rather than immediately assuming things like I should write all of the exception cases, ask your interviewer ahead of time. I recognize that there are multiple places that this could throw an exception if we're checking for those cases. Would you like me to check for those cases? And then even if the answer is no, don't worry about it. You've shown that you're thinking about it and that you would have been able to come up with that if that were an important way to spend their time. Yeah.
You mean like write code to test your code? How do you test?
Draw out in the same way that, I don't know, when we were going over Dijkstra's, I wrote out the entire structure for Dijkstra's. I wasn't just looking at and coming up with the shortest path. I was tracing the algorithm as I was doing it, keeping track of a custom data structure that said whether a particular node had been visited or not, etc. So when you finish writing your code, come up with a few examples of, if we're doing Dijkstra's, a few examples of graphs that have some base cases, some edge cases. There are no connections between any of the nodes. Does the code that I wrote handle that? Stuff like that, because you won't have any testing tools if you're working on a whiteboard. And the more that you think about this and practice with it, the less you need it in the moment, or the more you are capable of recognizing and thinking about those cases. Great point. One other thing you can do while you're preparing is to type the code that you write on paper into your IDE, and that will tell you about the mistakes that you make on paper. So once you have your absolute best answer, then go run a post-mortem on that and figure out what were the mistakes that I made and wasn't aware of, and try to learn from those mistakes. Concepts that you should be preparing for. Data structures, make sure that you're aware of and know how to use linked lists, trees, tries, graphs, stacks, queues, heaps, vectors or array lists, hash tables.
Okay.
Algorithms, things like breadth first search, depth first search, binary search, merge sort, quick sort. And again, this was written for a data structures class. So you should be able to expand significantly on this. Within an algorithms class, you should know different algorithm concepts as well.
Yeah.
So be able to use bit manipulation, know the difference between stack and heap memory, be able to solve problems recursively, use dynamic programming, be able to analyze solutions in terms of big O, both time and space complexity. On top of this, we talked about greedy algorithms. So this is not a comprehensive list by any means, but it helps you if you just take a look at this and think, could I answer an interview question today that targeted any one or more of these concepts or these algorithms or these structures? How do you feel about just diving into and solving a problem with these concepts? If the answer is great, I can do it right now, you're either well prepared or you're overconfident. If the answer is, I know what all of these are, but I don't know if I'd be able to perform right in the moment, given that it's been a little while since I saw some of these things, that's what experience and practice is for, is to bring what you know and bubble that up to the surface of your brain so that you can solve a problem immediately with those concepts. Because that's what we will need to do in an interview setting. You're not going to be able to prepare for exactly the questions that are going to be asked. I guess, any questions on this before I move on?
Any of them are fifth class?
Yeah, hopefully if you're passing through these classes, you know what they are. But yeah, that's why I take passing seriously, is no one ever retakes a class that they have already passed. Yeah, it's a modified tree.
Oh.
All right, problem solving flowchart. You're handed a question, or you're given a question. You're asked to solve a question. Listen carefully. If the interviewer is stating some part of the problem, it's relevant or useful in some capacity. If it seems like it's unrelated or not relevant to the solution to the problem, think about it again. Or come up with a follow-up question about it. There's something about if the answer is comma separated, that means that you're not printing something on each line, you're printing one line and comma separating the answers. So again, make sure you're focusing on each little piece of the problem description. So given two arrays that are sorted, if you focus on that are sorted, you don't worry about going through a sort. It doesn't come across particularly well. The very first thing you focus on here is sorting the arrays. Draw an example. Even before you start writing any code, just draw out an example. And you can do things like, all right, I want to make sure that I understand the problem correctly. Here is a diagram. Here is how I'm visually understanding the task. Any clarifications or anything that I'm missing? Something like that, again, shows that you plan, that you want to make sure that you implement exactly what is intended to be implemented without over-focusing on it. You're not asking them, hey, can you repeat the question again? Or I don't know how to do that. It's just, here is how I ensure that I'm answering the problem that you gave me. So go to the whiteboard or open up a whiteboard app or something, draw a good example of the problem, not an edge case or an error case, a good basic example, large enough to capture general behavior and patterns, dummy data values where you can, and yeah, try to avoid special cases in this case. Part 3, state a brute force solution. Rather than just immediately diving into the code, you can, if it's horribly suboptimal, think back to the last exam that we had with a brute force example. Could be horribly suboptimal, but again, shows that you understand the problem and immediately come up with a solution. State that it is a terrible solution, but say, all right, here's a solution, here is a brute force solution. You can dive into the complexities of the brute force solution or argue why a brute force solution isn't optimal enough and say, this looks like it's motivating the use of dynamic programming. Or, and again, it just shows the interviewer your thought process about this isn't something that you memorized. This is a dynamic programming appropriate solution. It shows that you can analyze the problem, come up with a solution, analyze the value of that solution, and use that to hone in on a better solution. That entire process comes across better than if you just grab a pen and start writing code. From there, optimize any unused information, leverage details from the problem, make sure that if the problem tells you something that you can take for granted, that you do that. Use a fresh example when you do go about solving it. You can also solve it incorrectly. If you just, it doesn't mean that you're sitting there with nothing while you're thinking about the problem. Start working through a solution. And then even if you recognize something like, I don't think this is going to work because, and again, you're speaking your thought process out loud so that the interviewer can again see how you recognize mistakes in your workflow, how you recognize what's not going to work at what stage. So they see a very raw problem-solving process. Make sure that you can clarify or verbally declare time and space trade-offs. I'm choosing to do this because it saves time at the expense of space. I recognize that I'm storing extra information in order to improve the worst case running time. State that you know that you're making that assumption. It's not just something that you are deciding to do. You recognize the benefits of the approach that you're taking. So make sure that you're pre-computing information at helm. Now that this is happening in algorithms, make sure that you're using dynamic programming and storing and reusing information if that's useful. Make sure that you use a hash table. It's very frequently a targeted structure in interviews to make sure that it is something that you know how to use. So even if you're just used to plugging and playing a hash table in code, make sure that you, if you're drawing this on the board, make sure that you know exactly what a hash table is and what it looks like and what it's doing underneath the hood. Then design your solution. You still haven't written a single line of code. So you're going to actively design it. Make sure you know what your variables are going to be, when they're going to change, things like this. And you can even draw out this variable, this idea, this variable, this idea, this variable, this idea. The more time you spend designing your solution, the easier it's going to be to actually implement. You'll just write code from top to bottom that is correct. And it shows that, again, you're a good planner. You know how to think through a problem and not just dive straight into it. Finally, you're going to implement it. You only are going to write a very small amount of code in a coding interview, so everything that you write counts. And you should make sure that you've thought through as much as you possibly can about the code that you're going to write so that it puts your best foot forward. Think about things like error checks. Some interviews will care about error checks, some won't. Ask them. Use object-oriented principles. So if a question is asking for an inheritance hierarchy, don't try to make a bunch of different classes that all stand on their own. Make sure that you're incorporating object-oriented design. Make sure that you've studied up again on OO design, your solid principles, design patterns, and make sure that you're, just like dynamic programming, make sure that you're aware of the right time to use them and the trade-offs that are inherent in their selection. Pay attention to variable names. This is, again, showcases your thought process. You want clear and concise. Don't use single letter variable names, but also don't use sentence long variable names. Something that uniquely identifies the concept is good. Beyond that, useless. Make sure that you run your code that you're writing through conceptual tests. Make sure that you're looking at and analyzing every line. Any off by one errors before you just say less than or equal to n and call it a day. Make sure you spend a second or two looking at that and verifying that, is it less than n? Is it less than n minus 1? Make sure that it's right. Even you can vocalize out loud. Pause in here to make sure I don't have an off by one error. Something like that. Consider any special cases. Frequent mistake points here are in things like your recursion-based cases, something like integer division, where your variables are integers, and you divide them thinking the result is going to be floating point, and it's not floating point, it's an integer. Oops. Make sure you think through things like that. We can give you some example technical questions. Things like, implement an algorithm to determine if all characters in a string are unique. How would you handle that? Do you have an immediate idea of what you would do? If you don't, I'm going to go back to the drawing board and think through again just your understanding of strings, how you would handle this. Given two strings, write a method to determine if one is a permutation of the other.
Then. Yeah, so. Oh, yeah, so permutation is if, let's see, if one of the strings is a substring of the other string, right?
It means that it's using the exact same characters, but potentially in a different order.
Oh, my fault. Okay, so, I'm sorry, I'm a little out of practice.
This is what practice is for. I want to give people a sense of this is probably something at one point or another would have been on the top of your brain to be able to do. But the more time there is between seeing relatively simple questions like this and actually knowing what tools you have in order to solve this in one line.
Okay, that actually makes sense, so.
It's worth reviewing that.
Yeah, so writing that method would be interesting part, so I have to figure out. Are the letters the same, yeah, are the letters the same, they have to be. I'm just thinking through some ideas for an example, but that's not the most relevant.
Choose a simple answer to this that we iterate through both the strings. It'll add some, like while iterating, there is while iterating, store characters that you have seen for each string. If the character at some point is in within both strings, return that they're actually wait. Permutation. Is this referring to like all characters within both are the same?
Yes,
Okay. Then in that case, just create a string, just create like a string array and store all characters that are within both strings. If all characters are within both strings and there's the same amount of characters within both strings, then they're a permutation of each other.
You'd be able to do things like analyze the complexity of your answer.
I mean, theoretically, it should just be about as long as the strings are.
so you're saying it should be like O of n runtime at worst?
Yeah.
I think that's reasonable. Yeah.
I was gonna say to reduce complexity, say like one-time permutation of a string that is like 1,000 lines long. Probably, at least in my mind, the fastest way to tell, so it's not like iterative series over and over and over, is to do kind of like a letter count, like say 50 A's and 200 B's. And right off the bat, to tell it's permutation is just check the letter counts. If the letter counts are matching, there you go.
Yep. Just make a table of letter counts.
Yeah,
That's also a good idea.
You could add to while you parse string 1, add to the letter counts. As you parse string 2, remove from the letter counts. And if you have an empty at the end, you're done.
Would that not be the same one?
Yeah, it is the same runtime, but it's something that you could probably implement slightly faster
Yeah, slightly.
or draw out faster on a board.
Makes sense.
So we are unfortunately out of time. What I want to go over next is very important, which is when you do have offers, how do you compare offers? How do you decide whether to take something? How do you negotiate? This is a very important skill, and so as there's time at the end of our review sessions over the next couple of days, this is something that we can come back to. There's not a ton here, just a few slides on it, but it's something that will maximize when you do land an offer, what your compensation is from that position.
Something I'd like to ask, so do you think that when we're done going for this, just focus on to the class fit for advice and maybe do some tweaking on your own before you post it? Actually, I'm gonna probably ask a little later because I remember you mentioned some places for me to practice coding, and I haven't really tried looking into those, and I kind of forgot about them in the midst of all the chaos. So I'd like to write down
It can give you lots of places to go.
or just set up some places like just practice things like. Let's see what codes maybe refreshing myself on Python is not the worst idea because even though I've been interacting with it a lot more lately, so it's not the most practical thing that I need. But I just need places to practice all sorts of programming languages. Main ones would probably be C++, Java, maybe Unix in some spots.